Bernice and I chose War by Sebastian Junger to read and analyze. War is a nonfiction text based on Sebastian Junger's experience in the war in Afghanistan as a journalist. He traveled to the most dangerous post in the country, Korengal Valley, where they saw firefights and casualties almost daily. There, he interviewed countless soldiers within the platoon and company to report on their thoughts, feelings, and actions to everything from mundane tasks to large firefights. The book is split into 3 sections focused on fear, killing, and love. Junger never mentions the politics of war. He only follows the lives of the soldiers and how they progress throughout the year. In the text, we found the claim to be, in the novel War, Sebastian Junger argues that the sole motivation of a soldier to fight for his own life is to preserve the brotherhood that is shared within the platoon. So first off, we start right away with ethos and how he presents that throughout the book. So he starts right off with saying, "This book was the result of 5 trips to the Korengal Valley in eastern Afghanistan that I took between June 2007 and June 2008 for Vanity Fair magazine." So this starts off right away with giving him a lot of credibility because we know that he is an editor for a very famous magazine, so he has had experience reporting, and that he actually has gone to Afghanistan and he has spent a lot of time there and he knows what he's talking about. He also states, "Many scenes in this book were captured on videotape, and wherever possible I have used that tape to check the accuracy of my reporting." So we also know that he's checked and checked again to make sure that everything that he's saying in this book is 100% accurate, so we can definitely trust him throughout this text.
For Logos, our first passage was, "In a war of that nature, soldiers gravitate toward whatever works best with the least risk. At that point in combat stops being a grand chess game between generals and becomes a no-holds-barred experiment in pure killing. As a result, much of modern military tactics is geared toward maneuvering the enemy into a position where they can essentially be massacred from safety. It sounds dishonorable only if you imagine the modern war is about honor. It's not. It's about winning, which means killing the enemy of the most unequal terms possible. Anything less simply results in the loss of more of your own men." Here, Junger uses facts of the war to make clear a way of life for the soldiers that is basically to kill or be killed. It is important to note that never in the excerpt does he talk about one soldier or one person. He only talks about soldiers and men, which further proves our claim by supporting that they are thinking about survival in terms of the platoon, which affects their actions and strategy, so to be in the best interest of all, not just themselves. Sebastian Junger first states that soldiers gravitate toward whatever works best with the least risk. Then he logically concludes that modern war is not about honor, and it's about winning, which means killing the enemy of the most unequal terms possible. This further proves our claim that the soldiers only fight for their survival and for their brothers. Our second passage for Logos is that several squads of American soldiers conducted an identical L-shaped ambush at night on the Abbas Gar and wiped out a column of Taliban fighters, nearly 20 men. The reason 1st Platoon did not get wiped out had nothing to do with the Apaches flying overhead or the 155s at Blessing. It was because the men reacted not as individuals but as a unit. Stripped to its essence, combat is a series of quick decisions and rather precise actions carried out in concert with 10 or 12 other men. In that sense, it's much more like a football than, say, like a gang fight. The unit choreographs their actions best usually wins. They might take casualties, but they win. The choreography always requires that each man make decisions based not on what's best for him, but on what's best for the group. If everyone does that, most of the group survives. If no one does, most of the group dies. That, in essence, is combat. In this passage, Junger uses a specific example of a strategy, explains it in detail, and then applies it to this war as a whole, and war in general. He describes a split-second decision made by a platoon in the midst of a firefight that ended up saving many lives. Junger explains that in war, the best decisions are the ones either made by all the soldiers as a whole, or ones that are made solely to protect others, not the individual. Junger specifies that it was because the men reacted not as individuals but as a unit. Then he goes on to describe them as a football team. This proves our claim because they work more as a team and as a brotherhood rather than just for
The
themselves.
first passage for pathos is during the Air War of 1944, a 4-man combat crew on a B-17 bomber took a vow to never abandon one another, no matter how desperate the situations. The aircraft was hit by a flak during a mission and went into a terminal dive, and the pilot ordered everyone to bail out. The top turret gunner obeyed the order, but the ball turret gunner discovered that piece of flak had jammed his turret and he could not get out. The other 3 men in his pack could have bailed out with parachutes, but they stayed with him until the plane hit the ground and exploded. They all died. Here, Younger describes a past event, a story from World War II, to prove our claim. And he shows that the brotherhood between this bomber crew is so strong that nothing can separate them, and that they all make decisions based on what's best for each other. And they knew that going into this pact that something would happen where they would all have to stick together, and they definitely followed it. And they thought more as a group than as individuals. And he uses this sad story to impact the readers to show that nothing is stronger than the brotherhood between them. So here we can see the particular parts where Younger uses sympathy to get his message across. He says that they took a vow to never abandon one another no matter how desperate the situations, and that the other 3 in his pack could have bailed out with parachutes, but they stayed with him until the plane hit the ground and exploded and they all died. And here we can see them, we can see Younger really impacting the reader with the emotions that he brings into this particular passage. Our second pathos passage is Cortez goes to one knee behind cover with his rifle up and glances to the right and sees a body lying face down, an American. Walker runs to get him and shakes him to see if he's all right and finally rolls him over. It's Staff Sergeant Rogel, shot through the forehead and his face purple with trauma. I just wanted to kill everything that came up that wasn't American. I actually didn't care who came up. Man, woman, child. I still would have done something. So here we see a specific example of our claim, and this is when Cortez is extremely upset about the death of an American and actually a friend of his, and we see the true effect on him. And this proves our claim by saying that he was not focused so much as on his personal safety, but he was just unbelievably upset about what had happened to his platoon mate. And we see that there's also an effect on the reader because they become emotionally attached to these characters, and we see that they are so distraught when something like this happens. We see specifically here that Cortez is motivated to fight when he finds out about the death of a fellow American, and this shows that his motivation comes from the protection of others because he sees this happen to Sergeant Rogel and he doesn't want it to happen to anyone else, and he's so upset about this that he doesn't care what it takes. He's going to protect everybody else as well. Our third passage for pathos is Cortez was another man who struggled with the loss of Restrepo. His death was a bit hard on us, he told me months later with typical understatement. We loved him like a brother. I actually saw him as an older brother, and after he went down, there was a time I didn't care about anything. I didn't care about getting shot or if I died over there. I'd run into the open and not care, and I'd be getting chewed out by a team leader and not care. I wasn't scared, honestly, but I just didn't care. I didn't care if I died or not. Someone finally pointed out to Cortez that if he got hit, someone else was going to have to run through gunfire to save him, and the idea that he might get one of his brothers killed was enough to get him to knock it off. Here we see the true impact that the death of a fellow soldier can have on someone. We see that Cortez doesn't really care anymore about living for himself until he realizes that he needs to go on living so that everybody else can. And this really brings sympathy from the reader to Cortez because they see that the only reason he wants to live for himself is so that everybody else can, and it shows the true impact that war and the death of a fellow soldier can have on someone.
So this passage is a summarization of brotherhood. The thing that existed at Restrepo, but was virtually impossible to find back home, wasn't so much combat as brotherhood. As defined by soldiers, brotherhood is the willingness to sacrifice one's life for the group. That's a very different thing from friendship, which is entirely a function of how you feel about another person. Brotherhood has nothing to do with the feelings. It has to do with how you define your relationship to others. It has to do with the rather profound decision to put the welfare of the group above your personal welfare. Once you've experienced the psychological comfort of belonging to such a group, it's apparently very hard to give it up.
Found for counter-argument was called The Making of an American Soldier: Why Young People Join the Military by Jorge Mariscal. And basically what Mariscal said was that men join the military hoping to become detached to the war as soon as they finish their service, and they're not really looking to make friends or to create a brotherhood because most of them are underprivileged and are just looking for a way to make money and continue with their school. After reading this article and looking at both of the arguments made by Mariscal and Younger, we have decided to side with Younger with his argument made throughout war, because we see that the relationships that the soldiers create in war are far more valuable than any benefits that underprivileged soldiers could receive when they return home.
So our book review was called Nothing to Do But Kill and Wait by Dexter Filkins, which is from the New York Times. And our summary is that Filkins starts off by summarizing what Younger's main objective of writing the book was, believing that it was to give a glimpse of the whole war and to give insight into what was happening in Afghanistan. Filkins also believes that Younger focuses too much on one platoon and doesn't incorporate enough emotion to the text for it to be effective. So overall, we disagree with this claim because we believe that Younger's objective for the book was to specifically write about the lives of the soldiers and not of the whole war. He wrote this so he could show the brotherhood that they have and the relationships they made and like the emotions that they go through. If his objective was to overview of the whole Afghanistan war, he would go into the politics and a ton of different other things like the Taliban, but specifically he only goes into the American soldiers' lives. Thank you for watching our video.
Thanks!